guys, it's Kelly here, and I am back again with another video. This video is featuring some new products from Erin Lee Creative. Totally adorable. This little pocket full of happiness, some wildflowers, this rattan. Some of these are older products because I like mixing my new and my old. But Erin's also recently branched into 3D embossing folders, which I think is super cool. So we're going to be making 3 different cards today. I'm going to get all of my die cutting out of the way right in the beginning, because basically we're only using, I know this is shocking on my channel, we're only using stamps for the sentiments. I'm using her Dahlia die cut as well, and the little accent piece, I've used that in the past before. The leaf stencil I've used in the past before as well. These are just, I mean, they're just really good pieces to keep reusing. So for the little accent piece, I'm actually going to cut one regular, and then I'm going to cut one and I'm going to use the back side of it, just so they're like 2 different directions. And the rattan, this is actually the rattan die cut 3. She has other ones as well. I really like, that's probably my favorite card. I'm not gonna lie, it probably is. So this is the 3D embossing folder. She actually has just a couple of them, but I liked how big the florals were on this one. And since I'm just using it to add texture and interest to my background, I wanted them to really kind of like pop. And so I did use the 3D embossing folder, spritz the back so I get a nice, good, deep impression. And then I'm just going to leave it white because it's beautiful by itself. For this piece, I am going to create a little background. I am using some like blues and teals, and this is the piece I'm going to do the stencil over. I'm also going to use the same combination for two of my little pockets. Yeah, both pockets. I did the same color scheme. And you may have noticed from the title of the video, one is simple coloring the most effective. And that might surprise some of you because I am obviously known for being a colorist and known for my detail coloring. And, but that doesn't mean that simple coloring doesn't have a place. So, let me just tell you what I'm doing real quick, and then we'll talk about the simple coloring a little bit more. So here I was doing them the same color to begin with. And then I realized I wasn't going to have any contrast. So I end up, for the little pockets, I add some faded jeans in there, but I am going to speed this up because it's a lot of ink blending. I don't prefer pattern paper. Not that I don't think it's beautiful. I do think it's beautiful, but I like making my own. I like that portion of the creative process. So I usually start all of my die cuts with white, and then I kind of jazz them up however I see fit for whatever card that I am making. But for this case, the background of the pocket that actually has the florals on it, that portion of the die, you're just going to be able to see really the edges of it. And then for the background, I'm doing that halo effect we've talked about a bunch of times on this channel, where it's lighter in the center, which is where my focal point is going to be. So it kind of draws your eye to the middle of the card. And for the top portion of the pocket, that's going to be pretty solid by the time we're all said and done. I wasn't sure exactly what my game plan was for the other 2 cards, but I had a very vivid picture of how I wanted to use the rainbow, and so we're going to make that full card first before we then move on to the second and then the third card. That's a little bit abnormal for me. Normally I just kind of do it assembly line style, like I do all of my ink blending, and then I do or all of my die cutting, all of my ink blending, all of my coloring, and then all of my building. But because I wasn't really sure 100% about how the other ones were going to come together, and I knew how I wanted the first one to come together, we're going to just build them out in their entirety as we go. So if you popped onto this video with a specific card in mind, we're going to do this one with the dark background first, then we're going to do the rattan window one, and then we're going to do the one with the white embossing background. So if you're looking for a specific card, you might want to hop around, dependent upon. Unless you're here for a little bit of story time, which we're actually going to be able to have time to have today, I think. It's been a while since we've had a true story time. But anyway, so the simple coloring. My friend Jen Shirkus, she is amazing. She does lots of classes and things like that. If you have not checked her out, I would absolutely recommend that you do. She's a fantastic artist. But anyway, she jokingly tells people in her classes the story of how, and I've probably told this to you before, here we're just using my sticky mat to hold my little stencil in place, and then I'm going to use my two lightest colors, so that's Salty Ocean and then Mermaid Lagoon, just because I want the suggestion of the leaves. I want them to be in the background. I don't want them to be the focal point. So, anywho, she always tells people in her classes that she was sitting down and she was coloring name tags for one of her classes, and she was using a Yeti from Lawn Fun. And her and our other friend, Shari Moss, were sitting there coloring them. And I was like, oh, what are you doing? And she's like, oh, we're coloring, whatever. And I was like, oh, I'll, sit down and help you. But then I just sat down and colored like I always do, which means like I colored a white Yeti with like 3 different grays. Back to what we're doing. So this is the first way I'm going to do some simple coloring, which is just blending with my Distress inks. These rainbows, they don't need anything else because they are a rainbow. So you could do the shading, and I've done that in the past, but because it's a background element, it isn't really necessarily something that we need to spend a lot of time on. You absolutely could cut these out of colored cardstocks. I just find that it's honestly cheaper to cut it out of white and then color it myself. I already own all of the inks. So that is what you see me doing here. So that is one way you can keep your coloring super simple, is just a 1-layer base coat of ink blending. Then after that, I am going to use the negative portion of the rainbow die cut to make sure everything lines up. I haven't glued anything together at this point. I'm just putting down the rainbows. And because I wanted my rainbows to not hang over my florals, I am just putting glue in the center because I'm going to be trimming off these edges, especially of these larger pieces. And then as the rainbows get smaller, then I'll glue down the whole thing and then remove that negative portion. So that's what I'm doing there. If you haven't seen it before, this is the My Sweet Petunia glue press. I have the fine tip on there, puts down a really nice little fine bead of glue, and is perfect for things like this. I love this thing. I wish that it wasn't, like the glue bottle holder wasn't so specific, but I totally get, like, it's a partner project between them and Tonic. So it's made to fit the Tonic glue bottle, but they do offer extra bottles so that you can put whatever kind of glue you're into those. And then once that's done, I'm going to start building up the florals. Now you may notice that I chose white for my florals, and I chose white for my florals because I had this dark background. And so here, it's not even simple coloring, it's no coloring, which is really, really effective because we have so much contrast. So we have all the colors added by the rainbow, and then the dark background and the dark pocket create this beautiful contrast between the white die cuts, and we didn't have to color any of those at all in order for them to make an impact. Here is where I'm just trimming off those edges of the rainbow. I want them to end behind the leaves so that they're not hanging down and making the design look a little bit awkward. After I get those down, then I will go ahead and adhere my pocket, and then I will put the top portion of the pocket on, and then I'm going to pop the whole thing up on foam. So anyway, so I sat down, I colored my Yeti in like 3 different gray markers, and Jen always tells the story because she thinks it's hysterical because I only colored one Yeti and then I like walked away, which is only made more comical by the fact that when I was redesigning my website, which is not live yet, but you'll see it and you'll laugh when you see the picture when it goes live. They were looking for like pictures. They're like, oh, will you have any pictures of you like in action? And I'm like, crazy person. I crafted Home Alone in my robe. So I was able to find together, like between companies that I've worked for or, worked tables for, like Creativation or Create, I was able to find some photos. And one of the photos that I found was actually me coloring this Yeti. It's me coloring this Yeti, and Jen took the photo. So it is one of the photos on my website, which is so funny because obviously, like, that's a story she's been telling for years now, which is absolutely 100% true. I colored one Yeti and then that was it. And then they were trying to like match my coloring, and she's like, this is insanity. I'm just going back to coloring it the way that I was coloring it before. But anyway, so but that does not mean that simple coloring doesn't have its place, and even I can recognize that. So here, in this case, like we talked about, because we have that contrast, I didn't need to add a lot to the rainbow. The rainbow on its own with just one base color is fine. We have the interest that's added from the stenciling and from the contrast of the white on the colors. My pocket was looking a little plain, so I did go in with a white gel pen and do some stitching like that you would see on a jeans pocket. This is a little a la Christina Warner early 2000s, if you will. Well, probably early 2010s. She might even still do it, honestly. And then the other thing that I'm going to do to add just a little bit of interest and sparkle, because that makes my heart happy, is I am going to go in with my Stardust Stickles and just add a little bit of glitter to like the bottom portion of the rainbow. Then we're going to set that card aside. We'll come back to finish it off and add the sentiment. But for now, it is done in its completion. Moving on to card number 2, I cut the little rattan window, and then I cut another piece to be my card front. This is trimmed down slightly smaller. It is 4 by 5.25. So here's how we're going to add the interest to this, is with the ink blending in the background. So before we did the simple coloring with the ink blending. This time we're going to add the shading with the ink blending and make it more interesting and do the simple coloring on the florals. So here I put down my lightest color just kind of randomly, but my darker colors I'm going to add purposefully in one corner and then in the opposite corner. It doesn't matter if you do top right, bottom left, or bottom right, top left, but they should be opposites. And then I'm going to darken those up. This is going to give the appearance as if there's kind of light shining through this window, which is going to give our background a super cool look. Because we have that piece, it's also going over, you can probably see in the top left-hand corner, it's going over the same background that we did for the rainbow card. We did the blue inking with the leaf stencil. I did the same thing for the background of that one. So again, we're creating that contrast between the white and the dark. And then we have this really interesting window piece that looks like it has light shining through. So I don't need to do much to my florals to make my card come together and be a cohesive design. So I really just picked colors. The reason the rainbow card is lying there is because I wanted to match my Copic markers to my distress inks. So, because, I'm all super matchy-matchy when I take my pictures. So anyway, I'm just going in and I'm doing one solid color, and that's it. So I'm not doing any sort of blending outside of 2 of the flowers. And the only reason that I did any kind of blending was because it was starting to feel a little monotonous. With the colors, I wanted them to stand out from one another. So for the large florals, by the way, that is the top of the pocket. I just trimmed off the bottom. So it's just like the top of the pocket frame. And then these are leaves from the little dahlia. I cut out a couple of those as well. So I am just going in, doing flat color, and then, like I said, the 2 flowers that are sticking up, I did a little bit of orange at the base, and then some yellow to blend that out. I didn't switch a bunch of different colors to make them blend. I just used the orange and then the yellow over top to blend them out. It worked fine. But again, that's just because the colors were I just had yellow sitting on top of yellow or orange sitting on top of orange. So in order for simple coloring to be the most effective, it still needs to create interest and not be one note. So here is the whole piece kind of laid out and put together. I'm going to use my press and seal to adhere everything down. Not the backgrounds. You'll see I peel those off. But for the little florals, because I already had them kind of where I wanted them, I'm just going to use those and my glue press to build out the rest of the card. So before we go any further, obviously we're halfway through the video, but let me just say that this is the 3rd weekend in September that my nose has been running like crazy, and I am so tired of my allergies. That's it. So just bear with me as we go through this. Speaking of allergies, let's start with that story time. So I never had allergies until I had my son. And apparently your hormones change like every 7 years, so they could get worse, they could get better. Like it just is what it is. Well, Nathan has had allergies since he was like 5. And so we just had like a nasal spray and eye drops that were prescribed from his regular pediatrician. We had never been to see an allergist for him because he was just little, you know? And then so earlier this year, he had told me that he didn't think that his eye drops or his nose spray was working really well. And we were supplementing with Benadryl. Well, that was making him sleepy during the day at school. So then we switched to Zyrtec. So that's what he's been taking, Zyrtec, and then his nose spray and eye drops as needed. But I went ahead and made an appointment for a pediatric allergist. Dude, those things take forever to get into. Let me just go ahead and tell you. It was a long, long wait. It was like 2.5 months. So anyway, we finally get to the allergist appointment, which was last week. So he has to be off all of his allergy meds, I think, for like a week before we go. So he is. And he also gets nosebleeds. Now, so does his dad. So I don't know if that's hereditary or if it's because of the allergies, but he gets them pretty frequently. Like the other week we were actually late to school because he woke up with one and we couldn't get it to stop. So anyway, I pick him up from school, take him to the allergist. He's a little worried about the scratch test. They go through and explain it to him. They were really great with him. So if you don't know, when they do an allergy test, they do a control patch that is just histamine. Oh, wait, hold on. We got to come back. We got to go back to the cards, y'all. So now we're moving on to the third card. It's the same blue that we did before, but I thought that it would be really kind of fun to add interest to the pocket do you remember like back in the 80s when they had like the acid wash jeans and they had like these bleached out spots on them and stuff? I thought that would be fun to kind of do on the pocket. Now this is not watercolor paper, so I had to be a little bit careful about how much water I was putting down, and that's why you see me going in and blotting it up. But I do think it was effective and kind of fun. So here, this is going to be the only piece that you see me color in my more traditional way. And when it comes to die cuts, I like to, especially with layered ones, I like to lay one piece on top of the other. I use my lightest color to kind of trace around any areas that are going to show. This shows me where I need to put my darkest shading. And then for this, I'm going to use 3 colors to color my little dahlia, and then the same thing for the inside. Now, why is this different than everything else? The reason this one is different, and the rest of the coloring for the flowers will be the same thing that you just saw. It'll be one just flat wash of simple coloring. But this one is the focal point. So that's where you want to, if you're going to spend any amount of time blending or shading or anything like that, you want to do it on your focal point. So in the previous 2 cards, my focal point was the kind of white contrast in the rainbow pocket. In the window, it was the window. The flowers are part of the focal point, but the window, the light coming through the window, is really the most interesting part of the card. For this one, because we have a white embossed background and all these beautiful florals, but this floral is going to sit right in the front, right over the pocket. It's going to be the main thing that draws your eye, which is where you want to spend your effort. Okay, if especially if you're just getting comfortable with alcohol markers or shading, you can do this with pencils as well, or watercolors, whatever floats your boat. But where your focal point is definitely where you want to spend the time. So because this is going to sit right up front, that's where I'm spending my time adding the shading. The rest of the florals, my kind of supporting actors, are going to be just one flat wash. And I don't think it's going to detract from the card design at all, because your brain kind of fills in those things. So if you have one that's super detailed, that's what your eye is going to be drawn to, and then you're not really going to notice that the rest of them don't have any shading. So we did the scratch test. They do the control for the histamine, which right away he's like, Mom, that's really itchy. And I was like, yeah, it's this one over here on the left-hand side. He said, yes. He goes, but this one in the top right, like my right shoulder, is also really itchy. And I look and I was like, oh, well, whatever that is, you're super allergic to, because that little red spot was even larger than the histamine. So what did we learn? this kid's allergic to everything. That's what we learned. So they had asked me, like, when are his allergies the worst? And I said they're worst in the fall, but spring is a close second. He's allergic to trees, he's allergic to grasses, he's allergic to weeds. And apparently that's how they pollinate: trees in the spring, grasses in the summer, weeds in the fall. So basically he has allergies just all year long, which I feel for him, because as I sit here pausing this video or this voiceover multiple times so that I can sneeze, or so that I can wipe my nose, or so that I can cough because I have itches in the back of my throat, like, I feel for him in a very real way. But hopefully they have put us on a more personalized path, knowing what he's allergic to now, so that it is much more manageable for him. But that one on the top right was oak. That's the one he was like, had the biggest reaction to. And then I think like black walnut and ash were really close seconds. It just, like, trees, I guess. I don't know. Mine was grasses. That was what I had the biggest reaction to. He did have a reaction to grasses as well, which he loves to cut grass. So that's kind of a little sad. But then she gave him some good maintenance tips. Like, when you're outside playing, make sure when you come in that you're washing your hands. If you've been playing really hard and you're like sweating, make sure that you're changing your clothes, taking a shower, just so you're not dropping pollen all over, wiping it on your face. So hopefully that will set us kind of up for success. We'll have to see how it goes. But he does have to take, she gave him 2 different medications plus so he still takes the Zyrtec. Then she gave him a prescription medication, then the nose spray and the eye drops, but those are kind of as needed. So those are like the backups if nothing else is working. But man, I hope he grows out of them. I really, really do. Because it's very challenging. So now this card here, we're just arranging the florals, kind of gluing everything down. And then you saw me before, I like to glue everything as one piece. That's no big surprise if you watch my videos. So I have adhered my dahlia and the leaves to the pocket, and then I have adhered my extra wildflowers to the bottom of the pocket. So that way I can just glue them all down as one piece. I find that to be easiest. But you could also use that press and seal trick that we used before. That would, work for you as well. It was really hard for me to pick like a favorite. Not that I have to pick. But I think the window one is it. But this one is a close second because I love a lot of white space. So you'll have to let me know which one you would like the best. But basically, the long and short of it is, with simple coloring, you can get away, and simple coloring is the most effective when you have other elements of interest that are your focal point. So because I'm like a completist, I like to spend the time, I enjoy coloring. So spending the time detailing everything out doesn't bother me. I quite enjoy it. But if you are a person who does not enjoy it, these are times when you can make the decision about, okay, where am I going to spend my resources? Or maybe you don't have a lot of time to color. Or maybe, you have arthritis issues or dexterity issues where you can only color for a certain amount of time. So hopefully these kind of tips will help you to know where to spend that time so that it is the most effective in your card design. So obviously we pop this up. Really happy with the way that looks. This one seemed a little boring even though we added the stitching. So in that stamp set, there is this little, it says, consider how the wildflowers grow, I think. And distress inks don't really stamp that well, so I switched over to an oxide for my stamping. You could use any navy blue ink, but this is what I had close by. So I just stamped that on there just to add a little bit more interest. And then for the sentiments, I'm going to heat emboss them in white on black. Now, these particular sentiments do not have dies, but that's okay, because I'm going to show you how I trim them out. Am I the best of the best at that? No. I remember like back in the day before dyes were really a thing, which is so funny because dyes are so popular now, right? But anyway, before dyes were really a thing, everybody had to like kind of trim out their own sentiments if you didn't want it to be a block. and or their own images if you didn't want them to be just one layer. And I remember like watching YouTube videos of crafters being just fascinated as how they got this like perfect border around their image, because I never could. And honestly, I still can't, but I can hold my own with a little bit of trimming. So we're going to tackle this the same way that we do fussy cutting images. Basically, I'm going to hold my scissors in my dominant hand. I'm going to keep those scissors upright, and then I'm going to use my non-dominant hand to turn the paper. This is going to give us the smoothest cut. And then I am just trying to keep that edge as even as possible. I also prefer rounded corners, so that is what I am doing as I'm going. I'm just rounding the corners around the sentiment portion, and I did this for the two larger sentiments. For this sentiment, it almost acts as like a windowsill, which wasn't my intention, but I think it's super cute. This one I just trimmed like into a little label. I popped it up on some foam and put it in front of my window. And I love the sentiment here, Grow and Grace. I think that's fantastic. I love the way Erin comes up with these sentiments. And so that went down there. And then for this one, I'm going to adhere it flat. And for the Pocket Full of Happiness, I did have to pop up just the edges on foam so it would sit flush, because that pocket is up on foam. But anyway, so that's all flushed together. I used my white gel pen just to add a couple of little details into like the center of my dahlia. I added some little highlights on some of the other florals, and then I moved on to, of course, adding some shimmers. I'm doing it in two different ways. So I'm adding just some gemstones to just these two cards. I didn't feel like the window one needed it to fill in any of the space. You certainly could add them, but I just didn't feel like it needed it. So I'm going to go in and add those. These rhinestones are from Crafty Meraki, and they are Sparkle Magic. Crystal Sparkle Magic. They're like a little rainbow kind of vibe, which I love. And then I added shimmer to some of my flowers just to add some more kind of sparkle and shine. And then that is it. That's all of the cards. So I hope this inspires you and teaches you a little bit just how, when you can use the time that you have a little bit better in case you don't have a lot of time for detailed coloring. I hope it's helpful to you. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. I always appreciate you, and I will catch you guys on the next video. Bye.